So, hello everyone, and welcome. This is yet another OpenChain project webinar. On this webinar, we're going to be hello everyone conference FOSDEM. For those of you who are aware of FOSDEM, it's a large event in Europe. And for those of you who are unaware, this is one of the biggest events in the whole world. It's been running now for many, many years, and it's one of the main places for thousands of people in the open source, free software communities to get together, share ideas, and share knowledge. Now, it's held in Brussels, which is famous for its sunshine and beautiful climate in early February. I'm kidding, it's horrible. And a lot of us can't get there regardless of the weather because it's so far away. So this webinar is going to be a chance to find out about what so many people with so much experience got together and talked about in FOSDEM. You're going to enjoy this webinar, I think, because we were extremely fortunate to have a very similar webinar last year, also hosted by Philippe. For your perspective, Philippe has been involved in this field through all the different phases. When it was the young field of rebellion, when it started to become a huge part of the market, and now where open source is the market. So he brings a great depth of knowledge and a great deal of experience in talking about FOSDEM, but also more generally, what FOSDEM and what happened there means to you, means to our community. Now, before we formally start this webinar, I'm just going to show our antitrust policy notice. I show this at the beginning of every meeting. You can find the full antitrust policy on the Linux Foundation website. And if you're from a member company, you can ask questions of our counsel, Andy Updegrove. With that formality out of the way, I'll briefly introduce our speaker. On one side, he's a busy businessman, a company called Nextbee, which is one of the very well-known companies providing services around managing open source matters like compliance and security. But he's also a very significant open source maintainer. And what's fascinating is that he maintains projects like About Code and Scan Code and Deja Code that provide open source tools and solutions for open source compliance, open source security, for managing the type of things that everyone on this call and everyone watching the recording really cares about. I don't want to give too many spoilers about FOSDEM, but I'll add one in that he's been running an adjacent event covering matters like compliance that brings together those of us who are brave enough to go to Brussels in early February. And this year, I've seen some photographs. The room was packed. It was a very interesting collection of people talking about exactly the type of things that we need to talk about. How do we manage compliance? How do we manage security? How do we manage SBOM? How do we manage automation? Now, OpenChain webinars are informal. This is really a community type of project. We build ISO standards in a totally open source way. Our method of running a webinar is handing a link and saying, click to join. Our goal is to make everything community oriented. And in that sense, during this webinar, and I'm sure Philip won't mind, just ask questions if and when you have them. Okay, this is about you getting the information about FOSDEM. It's not as good as going there, but it does provide a close second to catch up. Right, and the final note I'll have is that this webinar is streaming over YouTube so that people passing by on that platform will be able to dial in as well. I saw, I think on the weekend, that according to Nielsen ratings in the United States, YouTube is now the biggest television station in North America, which is weird, but that's where we are now. Oh, I see Oliver's on. Hi, Oliver. Oliver is the leader of the OpenChain automation work group. So he's been at the center of this type of thing just as long as Philip has. So it's good to have you on the line as well. And I see in our audience many, many interesting people from our community in Europe, in China, in Japan, and beyond. Welcome, one and all. Okay, enough for me. Over to you, Philippe. Please tell us what happened, why it matters, and what we should do next.
Yes, thank you. I'm blushing for your introduction. Let me share my screen. And again, I'd like to restate what Chen just said. Please feel free to interrupt me at any time. And prepared a slide deck, slideshow. There we go. You should be able to see the shared screen at the moment.
It's perfect.
Right now. Good. All right. So I'll present a FOSDEM recap for 2024. Very brief additional word about me. I like to think I'm on a mission to help reuse more free and open source software. And I like to do that with free and open source software itself and open data. And I cannot stress how important is it to have open data together with open source code. And I maintain a few tools like ScanCode, which is well known, and also standards like package URL. Just quick highlight there, everything I do and we do at NextB and about code is free and open source code and data. And again, I'm restating that one more time, but I think it's important. And the way we support ourselves is through grants and services that either support directly or indirectly the work we do on open source tools. So trying to get a way to sustain the fun of developing open source code and creating data. So FOSDEM. This is a picture of the main keynote room, which is an amphitheater. As you can see, it was pretty packed. Not everyone could get into this room. You see a few empty seats, but basically you have, at the entrance of each room, you have a set of volunteer gatekeepers, which are counting how many people went to the room. So at some point of time, they can stop people to get into for security reasons. And more often than not, there were many cases where you couldn't get into the room at all. You had to wait for someone to get out before you could get in. And so that just gives you a bit of an idea of the ambience and the energy that you have in this event. If you've not been there, irrespective of the weather, which is lovely, this year, for instance, it didn't snow, so it was wonderful. Try to go there next year. It's unique in the world. It's entirely volunteer-led. And there's no registration. You just walk in, basically. And which is kind of surprising in the world of many of these events, for which you need first to register, second to pay a fee, and so on and so on. I think there was roughly, last year, they counted about 8,000 folks. This year, my hunch, based on having been there forever, for over 10 years now, is that there were about probably 10,000 people. It was as big or bigger than I ever saw this event. And it's on a university campus. So we're moving from room to room. And you're going from one building to the other building. And on the way, you meet someone. And you eventually never reach the place you intended to go, which is okay, because in some case, as I said, the room is full packed and you cannot go in. Everything is live streamed, meaning you can not only watch the presentation live, but you can also watch it after after it's recorded and live stream at the same time. So you can review all the presentation afterwards, which is really nice. It's also a bit of an odd event because it's the only place I know where you would have folks working on stage doing a keynote in front of 2,000 people with a bottle of beer in hand. It may not be super politically correct, but that's the way it works there. You don't see drunk people, but there's a bit of a badge of honor to work around with a beer there because of Belgium and beer. So there were about 55 what's called developer room of dev rooms, which are organized by topics, and they change a bit every year. It's a group of volunteers that say, hey, I want to organize a room, and they pick the winners there. It's not much competition, but they're trying to get things every year working in a way that makes sense for everyone. I've highlighted some of the rooms here. You can see in bold that were more interesting to me. But there's a lot of in-depth technical discussions on many topics. If you're a DNS buff, you'll get your fix there. If you're working on Nix or Mozilla or interested in Rust or Ruby, you'll have probably the world's best experts, contributors, and maintainers and users in each of these domains there. It's really, really mind-boggling in terms of depth and breadth. Any questions so far?
I actually have a small question, which is related to, this is an incredible size for a volunteer event.
Yes.
Yeah. Who on earth is organizing it in the background?
Volunteers. So there's a long-running stream of volunteers and folks that help. There's no kind of a very clear organization. You can join the IRC channels and volunteer to help. They have a few mailing lists, but it's really a volunteer organization. I guess the only thing, the only kind of a small darker spot that I could bring up is that the way the dev rooms are selected, if there's a process for that, it's not entirely done in the open. So that may be the only thing where I would say, well, oops, what happened there? The only thing where we may want to have a bit more transparency if I were to there. But other than that, everything is happening in the open. So yes, it's mind-boggling. So there are sponsors which help support that. Oops.
Oh, by the way, I see Helio has his hand up. Helio.
Yeah, go ahead.
Philippe just was talking about the sponsors itself. Maybe is interesting information if you mention what you said to me last time about how Google and the network was sponsored indirectly because they are not allowed the sponsors. Remember that you told me this in the FOSDEM?
No, they are actually. They are. So, but the thing is, no. So for instance, you can see on my screen the event receives funding, and I think there's actually a non-profit Belgian association which is handling all that. So, but they receive funding. There's otherwise they wouldn't be able to do that. If anything, for instance, the ULB, which is the university and its campus, is donating the whole place over the weekend, and there's quite a bit of infrastructure to be able to record and live stream over 2 days across 55 rooms. It's like, if you think a bit for a second, yes, that's a lot. It's mind-boggling. So I'm not sure it answers your question, Elio, but the event as a whole is funded by these folks, and but the fact is that it's not a pay for play. There's no registration needed, no fee for attending. That's the whole point. And there's no specific treatment from anyone that is actually sponsoring the event. Okay, let's go back to this view slideshow. Okay, so some of the key developer room of interest, at least to me, was the legal and policy issues dev room. I've put the links, and please go there. You can watch all the presentations. And in many cases, you also have the slide decks and links. You have links to speakers and their homepage and all that. So that's pretty useful. I'm still not done to reviewing all the topics I wanted to go to, because again, all of these 55 events are happening mostly in parallel. So legal and policy issue, there was a room that I really wanted to go to on Sunday, which was a new room on the European legislative landscape for open source, especially what's called the CRA, the Cyber Resiliency Act, which is something that's going to impact pretty much everyone in the world that does software. The room was so packed and busy that I could not get in. And I was at the door and there was nobody going out, but somebody was allowed to go in, but she was a member of the European Parliament, and she was a speaker. So I tried to pretend after that in front of the guy that I was also a member of the Parliament, but he didn't cut it. I didn't look serious enough. And of course, the software bill of material dev room, which was on Sunday, as well as committee. One thing of note there was no room specifically dedicated to security. The closest to that was the SBOM dev room. Yet, what you could see is that there were a lot of specific presentation and talks and discussions, workshops, panels around security, but they were essentially diffused in all the dev room. And I think it's actually a good thing, because security shouldn't be confined to one place, and it's really a concern for everyone. Some of the specifically discussion that were of interest to me. Talk from Thierry Carrez, who's the general manager for the Open Infra Foundation, which does OpenStack, among other things, which says, single vendor free and open source software is the new proprietary. And we've seen that with HashiCorp and many others. And it was really interesting to have someone that has a deep experience in open source providing a recap of the problem. I think, in a way, whether you are an open source project or whether you are consuming open source, the license switches we've seen with companies like Sentry, HashiCorp, and a few others are the most problematic. We hate this kind of event because they're essentially a disturbance in the force. It's okay to have a proprietary license. It's okay not to be open source. Well, it would be best to be open source. But doing these license switches is probably, to me, one of the most troubling problems. There was a presentation also from the maintainer of Homebrew, which is a fairly popular package manager, primarily for Mac OS, but also for a bit for Linux, Mike McQuaid. And he used to be working as an employee for GitHub. He started his own business to build and provide extra tools and services around Homebrew. And it was interesting because there's a lot of good perspective on the widely successful open source project and how to to manage this as a maintainer to avoid burnout and try to build some business around it. Of course, all the SBOM related presentations were super interesting, and the European policy discussion that I could not attend. Both here and in other dev room, the rulings and regulations around cybersecurity were top of mind, whether it's the CRA, Cyber Resiliency Act in Europe, or equivalent regulations in the US with the executive order from Biden from a year, 2 years ago. There's also another thing called the PLD in Europe, Product Liability Directive, and everybody wonders whether open source projects will continue to be able to disclaim warranties and liability. So there's a lot of discussion there. It's of course very important. I guess the way I'd like to think of it is that we were doing open source in a closet, and now they found us, and there's definitely efforts to be done as part of the community and its users to help our game towards more transparency and improve security posture. All right, questions so far? Other questions? Please stop me at any time.
I don't have a question right now, but I just wanted to highlight that we might have a bit of a deep dive coming for the Resiliency Act and the Product Liability Directive, and also the AI regulation in the EU. I was talking with Open Forum Europe, and hopefully in April they'll deliver a few deep dives for us. Just a side note to build on those discussions.
Great. So yeah, that'd be awesome. So on the Friday before FOSDEM, I was organizing a fringe event, as they're named, which the topic was open source compliance, license and security. And you can see a picture there provided by Nico Ricken, who was also emceeing the event together with Thomas Tenbergen. And you probably recognize some of the face you can see here. The interesting thing for this event is, first, despite there's a lot of glass on the tables, a lot of glass bottles, there was only one broken glass during the whole event. It's noticeable because the day before there was an event for Chaos in the same place, and they had broken a lot of glass. The other thing you see is there's a lot of post-it on the walls. You see a few computers, but basically this was a paper-based event. No slides, no streaming. That was by design. And I think it worked out well. It needs to be honed and refined in terms of organization. But the whole idea was to say, in the morning, we would talk about projects presenting their plans and discuss opportunities for collaboration. And in the afternoon, have users that share their requirements, concern, and else. And lots of debates, questions, interruptions. The fact that there was no slides, no demonstration was a bit of a refresher where, well, today online, we wouldn't be able to do that. So it was strictly something you can do in person. We have scores of transcribed notes from all these post-its and pictures. They all be posted online in shared GitHub org. There were about 75 people that showed up, a bit more. Some of them showed up only in the morning or in the afternoon. But that was really nice to have so many folks. And to give you an idea of who was represented here at a high level, we had folks from all these companies and projects, plus also, I'd say, as special guest folks from NLNet Foundation that presented their program to fund open source project together with the Sovereign Tech Fund. Oops, there's a typo there. German Sovereign Tech Fund, which also provides funding for open source projects. And we also had Alan Friedman from the United States CISA, who is the godfather of S-bombs and VEX, and very active in the space, and honored us from his presence. We were also blessed to have wonderful sponsors, including SPDX, CycloneDX, Ocelot, and all these great companies. So really thank you for that. If you work in these companies, that was awesome. We wouldn't have been able to have a decent room like this one, short of having your support. Last year, we had a room originally sized for about 35 to 40 people, and there were over 60 people that showed up. The room was packed. It was like literally people were sitting on the ground. So this year we were able to, everybody had a chair. That was a big improvement. It was also thanks to the sponsor, a free event, and we intend to keep it this way with voluntary contributions.
I have a question.
Sure.
Just so I can plan ahead for next year. How much is needed to help sponsor it? Because I'd like to try and maybe reserve some OpenChain budget for 2025.
So between the location, the rental of the room, very simple catering. We were a bit running low on coffee this year, but simple catering plus minimal supplies. The budget is about 5,000-ish euros, roughly 5,000, maybe 6,000. So anything that can help there is really useful. I've had NextB fill in the gaps to make sure we could meet all the commitments.
Of course. Well, I'm going to talk with my board at our next meeting in March about trying to have some allocation of budget for next year.
Yeah, that would be really awesome. Again, we want to make sure we have a decent place, and it's, when I say decent, we don't want to get into a luxury place. We had to, for instance, negotiate with the hotel saying, we don't want wine or beer for lunch. We don't want a 3-course meal. We just want a sandwich, a fruit, and a drink, soft drink. That's it. But so again, it's by design frugal, but the intent is to make sure we can stay for the full day in a room and focus on the collaboration.
By the way,
go ahead.
Oh, sorry, Philip. We just had a great question in from Fukuchi-san at Sony. He's just saying that the talk on single vendor FOSS is the new proprietary is interesting. He's wondering who presented it and how did the audience respond. So pretty hot topic here in Japan and elsewhere.
Yeah. So the talk was from Thierry Carrez. Oops, it's 2R. There you go. Thierry Carrez is the general manager of the Open Infra Foundation. Open Infra Foundation is the foundation that deal with OpenStack. So I don't know, yeah, OpenStack. And that's this guy. There was a lot of energy there. It doesn't have yet, no, it has, yes. You can see online the whole presentation and slides. So there were, yeah, it was really well received, very interesting. I think really the difficulty there, from my point of view, is how do you fund and sustain open source projects? And if you are trying to sustain that, one way is to be a software company and provide the tool as free and eventually provide services or have an open core strategy. To me, the problem is that when that happens, that's great, except that the thrust and the directions of the project will going to be for the benefits of the single company that sponsors this project. And if it's a small startup, it's going to be for the shareholders and VCs. Eventually, the community will not be the main beneficiary, and that's what you need to understand there. I think that's really important. Now, the difficulty also is that if you look at foundations, and that includes the Linux Foundation, Apache, GNOME, OW2, Eclipse, OpenInfra, none of this foundation really is there to fund the project. They promote, organize, work in a neutral way around the project, but they don't fund the project. As far as I know, none of these actually pay the maintainers. In general, there's a few exceptions. For instance, the Linux Foundation pays Linus for Linux and some of the key maintenance of Linux. But in general, that's not the purpose of these foundations. So there's a problem, there's a gap there. And I think you could say, well, single vendors are the problem. Yes, they are, but they're also one of the way to enable and create open source projects and fund the development of open source projects. So I hope it answers a bit your question. I'm not sure if it does exactly, but that's a fact. That's a situation here. Sponsors. So some of the key insights that came from my discussions there and this event before and during FOSDEM is that in our space, meaning compliance tooling and compliance processes and workflow, there's an awful lot of confusion. We, as professionals in the space, are confused about the tools, capabilities, and features, what they do, how they overlap, how they compare with commercial tools, and I guess that just came out as part of the discussion. People are confused. It's not clear also what are the workflows, and on a specific workflow, which tool contributes to which part of a compliance workflow. There is no tool that does everything. I wish mine would do that, but that's not the case. There is no single tool that does everything. So we need to assemble patchworks of tools, and it's not clear which one works best. And so there's a lot of work that's likely needed to improve overall the comprehension and understanding we have around these tools. One of the possibilities there would be to have benchmarks to evaluate and compare tools, ways to document what each tool does. There's been some suggestions and projects started, I think, by Bosch on this topic. So again, really confusion. It came out as a surprise a bit to me, but everybody is confused. I don't know if you are confused too, but even the most advanced OSPO users and open source developers are at times confused there. So shared data was the second thing. We discussed it last year, and I think the problem is that everybody wants it, and nobody is really ready to make the big jump to help and pay for it. And to me, that's the key issue is I was trying, for instance, on the topic of security, I made a small Fermi estimate in a discussion with buddies yesterday. And we're trying to say, how much would it cost to provide curated security feeds where each of the CV is reviewed and properly qualified and peer-reviewed to avoid all the junks we see? And it's probably a couple of millions a year. I don't know how much the CISA and the Department of Commerce in the US pay to support the work of the National Vulnerability Database and with MITRE and else, but it's probably several million every year. And so it's difficult there. It's difficult to assemble private funding, and it's difficult to get government funding also. So in terms of shared data, I'm talking about origin, license, and security. And again, it's a repeat. So, but the question is, what have we done really in a year as a community or as individual project? I try to do some. There's project like Ocelot, which is doing its share too. But we want things and we don't do things. So we need to, at some point of time, put our acts where our mouth is. Another thing that came out more on the tool side is that we need to find ways to store curations across tools. When I'm talking about curations, I'm talking about potentially three things. Say there's a fact which is wrong. This project says it's home. We said this project's homepage is example.com, but no, they've moved. They were on SourceForge and now they're on GitHub. So we want to update the homepage for the project. That's a fact. There's not much of a controversy there. The second type of curation or correction would be where you provide an interpretation. For instance, I think this license, the license for this project is MIT, even though there's a bit of GPL there that's used in a build script, for instance. That's eventually some kind of an interpretation. The third level would be policy, where in my organization, we prefer GPL over MIT when we do kernel development, for instance. Or you prefer MIT, whichever policy you have. The point is, these are organization specific. What I'm talking here about shared data is a way to eventually store this information in the same format or the same overall structure, and mostly also focusing on the facts. How do you get facts corrections? How we help putting that upstream is also part of the problem. It's not an SBOM. It's more about being able to store information that go into an SBOM inside the code base. You could think of it as a missing package manifest for packages that don't have one, or a correction of the package manifest information when you have one that's incorrect at a high level. It was a clear, we had a meeting with some folks from the Free Software Foundation Reuse project, Flaked, and me representing About Code. We'll come back to that, but eventually there's a need to create a simple shared format that can be reused by different tools. Question there, by the way.
Yes, we have a question from Ninjoji-san, and it was as follows. Were there any discussions about benchmarking the quality of SCAs and SBOMs at FOSDEM 2024? So that's software compliance analysis for those who aren't familiar with the acronym. So were there any discussions about benchmarking the quality of SCAs and SBOMs at FOSDEM? In particular, I would like to know what the current consensus or mainstream opinion is in the case without package management tool chains. So without package management tool chains such as C, C++.
Yeah. So yes, there was a big discussion on the topic. I didn't bring that as an insight, but more as a call to action. So we'll look at that in a second. But generally speaking, yes, there's a problem, which is when you have packages which are not on main package repositories and registries. And the practical examples is everything you put in an embedded device. And whenever you do C, C++ development, these packages are not there. So most of the efforts to date on SBOM benchmarking and reviews that I've seen are really comparing the somewhat easy stuff, which is the list of known common packages. So, JavaScript, NPM, Maven Java, PyPI. I'm not saying these are easy, but these are not super hard to get right. And there's a void for everything that's off this package registry. So did we discuss that? Yes. Is there a solution? At the moment, no. One way is to work around things like curation format, where this would become somehow a missing manifest for these packages that don't have a manifest, basically. I know, for instance, so I created package URL, and it's a recurring theme of concern. So is how do we reference a package that doesn't have a package repository and an ecosystem behind it? So I'm just raising questions. I don't have the solution. I think in the end, the solution there is to evolve a convention, probably around using Perl as an identifier may be useful for generic identifiers. And the only way you can really do something that works for these in terms of recognizing the package is either you put something which is explicit. So say a small file like we do with about code, about files, which says, oh, this directory contains zlib 1.2.13, and it's been patched with this and these modifications. So as an example. Or you do code matching, where you have a tool that can do the matching against a knowledge base and will be able to accurately recognize that this directory contains zlib 1.2.13 and it's been patched. Today, you don't really have a good solution for the latter. Most of the tools that do matching are not really answering this question. They're raising more questions and returning tons of false positive. I have a side project on that, so we could discuss that separately, but that's an unsolved problem. And if you think it's important enough to discuss separately, then let's have a discussion on that. Okay, next one, and I'm going to be a bit provocative here, but there was a lot of confusion also about the fact that we have two overlapping competing standards for SBOM. Everybody hates that, and I'm sure if you're a user, you hate that. If you're a developer, you hate that, because you have two standards to implement both reading and writing. My insight is that in the end, both of these will be there for the long run. One, SPDX is an ISO standard. Second, CycloneDX is being standardized at ECMA. So will be also an international standards of sorts pretty soon. And so, as we say, standards are wonderful. There's so many to choose from. Let's hope there won't be a third one. But as a user, I think you have to be aware that you will have to support both. I'm pretty sure at this stage that no government agency will make a choice in one way or the other. Frankly, it's not a big deal because these are essentially file formats. The content is mostly the same. So whether you receive the file as a Word document or an HTML document or PDF, yes, sometimes you prefer this format or this format, but it doesn't matter. The content is the same. I think also one insight is that VEX, which stands for Vulnerability Exploitability Exchange, which is somewhat new, not entirely new concept, but the idea is to say is that rather than provide you an SBOM, I'm going to tell you whether I am vulnerable to this and this vulnerability or not, and how you can eventually remediate some of these. It may, in the future, make this debate much less relevant because one of the main draw these days for SBOM is the security use case. And again, I'm interested as a user to know if I have a worry, and I'm interested in an attestation of you, the provider of the software, to know, to tell me if your code is vulnerable or not. As a user, your whole set of packages, it's useful, but I cannot influence that. I don't care too much. I think for license, we may still be always looking at SBOMs. But there's a problem also, confusion about what to put in an SBOM. For instance, if you provide software and your customer demands to have a full file level SBOM, what does it mean? If you have a product with 1 million files, are you sending an SBOM which lists 1 million files and all the information about security and license about these 1 million files? I don't think so. I don't think I would want to do that. If I were a proprietary company, I wouldn't want to share the listing of my directories and files because that's eventually leaking trade secrets. And of course, you shouldn't do proprietary code, so that shouldn't be an issue, but let's be practical. And so sharing very large detail on the development environment may not be neither desirable nor practical, not usable. What do you do with that on the receiving end? There's really not much you can do except look at it, import it in a tool that supports that, maybe like Deja Code, but you look at it and you cry, basically. So there's a lot of discussion about the types of SBOM, but I think from a very practical point of view, the thing that really matters is what is running, what is deployed, what is shipped, what is distributed. The rest is, I think, much less interest. And for all the minutiae you can have about different types of SBOM, in the end, before we can just provide decent and create decent inventories of the code we use, we should probably try to focus on the important stuff that matters first, the code you run. Okay, questions? Okay, I'll move. Next insight. That was true last year, it's still true this year. The folks that deal with security and license are not the same. As a tool developer, I build tools and data for both. But what's very clear to me now, more than ever, is that the the processes are, in most cases, for large teams, supported by different organizations, different groups. The focus of an OSPO on license compliance, for instance, typically is centered around a package or packages and files. The focus of the vulnerability management is centered around a security issue. And so they look at the same data, but from two different angles. The core skill is to determine where the code comes from. And the users are different at this stage. But I see more and more convergence, and especially in smaller organizations, the overall management of open source compliance and security ends up being falling on the same individual or individuals. Very often it's going to be a bit of individual. So eventually I see more and more convergence in the future, and I think that's important. If you're focusing more on the license side, you should keep a clear eye, because you have unique skills, competencies, capabilities in terms of process and tools that are essential to managing vulnerabilities. Questions?
I saw we had a comment from Anthony, just that there's various quality metric for SBOMs, and he has some insights in the SBOM room. His view is that they should be more than minimal elements, which is an interesting comment. I'm just going to flag something here which might provoke conversation. But in Japan, there was the creation of SPDX Lite by the OpenChain Japan community, and then contributed to SPDX. It's part of 2.2, and it'll be a profile in 3.0. And in that case, it really was whittled down to the minimum, because many of the smaller suppliers in Japan have limited capacity to provide data. It's like onboarding them into the concept. Here's how you can start putting this in the Excel sheets, and we'll pull it out with our automation. But at the same time, Anthony, it's a very interesting and valid point that minimal elements are, of course, only useful to cross a certain bar, right? Yeah.
Yeah, so we could have a separate discussion on this topic. So yes, maybe there should be more to the minimal elements, for instance, promoted by the US NTIA than we have today. Yet at the same time, these are probably too much in many cases. For instance, it's not easy to provide an information like who is the supplier or vendor of an open source package. You know, it's a project. There's no such thing as a supplier. So there's already elements that would be difficult in some case to provide just to meet these minimal requirements. And I really like SPDX Lite for that, which is to say we have ways to promote minimalism and ways to limit the burden on the providers of the code to the things that matters and which are the essence. I created as a tongue-in-cheek a small project that I call KissBomb. And again, it's not super serious. It's more as a joke, which is to say, what could be the absolute minimal SBOM? And that would be something which would just have a list of package URLs. And I'm making an argument around that, explaining, yeah, maybe it's enough. And I think we'll have to evolve. On the one hand, like Anthony, you mentioned, on the one hand, probably a bit more depth, so it's more useful, but at the same time, probably a bit less depth, so it's practical and usable by a larger number of folks. Okay, Call to action. So you can see the room we were in, and you can see, by the way, all the post-it left and right. We have all the pictures of that. So call to action, you know, everybody wants data. I'm throwing out an idea to say, how can we find a way to found an open and shared knowledge base? We hate redoing scans and code analysis over and over again. There's efforts to provide curated data like OSADO, historically similar efforts that clearly define, which have been focused mostly on the curation. And but how can we create and build a decentralized database of scans, contributed fixes, correction, curation, where the data is there. I may agree or not to your curation, but I'd like to have that not replacing the standard, just being there side by side as an opinion. So this idea would be to say, could there be a way where we can fund this effort with some what I call enlightened managed data service, where users, companies can purchase a data feed where we provide curated origin, license, and security information for all the package you use, based on lightweight scan using some of our all wonderful tools we have. And then the data is eventually shared back to everyone in the open. So like that, maybe we can have the best of both worlds, where you serve your own business interests, and at the same time, everything is shared back with the rest of the community. So that's one thing. Please reach out if you think you want to make that a reality. I have tons of package scans and data available, ready to share. Again, the problem is how you found and sustain that on a longer term basis. If you could think it's something that could be done on the OpenChain, that would be awesome. So,
by the way, we have a ton of questions in on the side.
Go ahead.
One is Augustin asking, what is the first thing that OSPOs focused on license compliance should do to contribute to vulnerability management?
So what are the things open source
first
program?
Yeah.
Well, a very simple thing you can do is being able to surface the issues. So, you know, the first step to recovery is understanding that there's a problem. And very often folks just don't realize the criticality and importance of a problem. Practically, once you have an inventory of your packages, if you look up that data, say, and I provide an open vulnerability database for that, based on package URLs, you look up the data and you see which package may have a non-vulnerability. You'll be very quickly realizing that there's not one of your project code base that doesn't have at any time at least some vulnerabilities, in some cases some very serious vulnerabilities. They may not be exploitable in the context of your product, but they are there. And you know, vulnerability management is not like a binary thing. It's not like I am vulnerable or I'm not vulnerable. It's a gradation where at any time you will have vulnerabilities in your code. It's impossible to do it otherwise. There's on average between 70 and 100 new vulnerabilities being disclosed publicly every day. Over 2023. And any serious code base nowadays, very quickly, if you do containerized development, contains 10,000 packages. Every day, you're going to have to deal with 5, 10 of these. So just surfacing as first the problem, I think, would go a very long way.
We have another question from Sal. What critical or important roles do upstream open source ecosystems play? What's the context there, Sal? Play in what? We haven't, while I'm waiting for that, we've got an interesting one from Jean-Baptiste. Decentralized database of package scans, etc. Wouldn't that be OSV?
No, OSV is an aggregator. It doesn't provide package scan. So OSV aggregates data from GitHub, from the National Voting Database, and another source to share that again back. It's not decentralized. It's centralized at Google. So in that sense, it's not exactly the vision there. And I love OSV, by the way. They reuse some of the code we've written for vulnerable code and scan code. So I love them, but it's not the vision here. OSV is a centralized database of package vulnerabilities, which is under the control of one organization. So that's not the vision I have at all.
Salve just sent in a clarification. So what critical or important role do open source, upstream open source ecosystems play in the availability of metadata and quality? And I did hashtag use SBOM upstream.
Yeah, so SBOM is a format. So SBOM is not a solution to metadata quality. It's just a way to reduce the churn when we're writing tools to parse all the manifests and understand which package is present or not. I think in terms of leverage, being able to adopt better standards ecosystem-wide, say all of Maven, all of PyPI, all of Rust, or all of Go, is extremely powerful. It's also extremely slow. I've been working for years, for instance, to have Python adopt ways to report SPDX license expression as package license in the metadata. It will happen eventually, but it just takes a lot of time. So a lot of leverage, very slow impact. And on the security side, same thing. I mean, there's a lot of things which are done today, probably more in that domain than any others, but it's happening very slowly. And there's one thing which is important, which is it's one thing to have an ecosystem adopt norms and standards progressively, and we need that. But the other thing is, as Mike Quaid likes to say in his presentation on the Homebrew, he says, I'm not your supplier as an open source developer. And so the problem here is, how do you help open source project upstreams with an unfounded mandate that benefits you to provide better metadata, better security information, better licensing information? That's a difficult problem. I don't have a solution there, but at heart, it's a serious issue. Okay, I'm just going I'll share the slides, so we'll have them, but there's one more thing here, a couple more things in terms of call to action. So first one, shared knowledge base. Second one is try to find ways to reduce the confusion about which tool does what. And there's been work done originally in the OpenChain tooling landscape. I think we need something like that, but probably a bit more that would be contributed by each of the maintainers of the tools. And that may be in a neutral ground, so it's not only OpenChain, but we can have other organizations beyond the Linux Foundation joining too. And that specifically highlights which features of each of the tool provide. And I'd like to know, for instance, which tool does support, I don't know, Cocoa Pods in terms of analysis, these kind of things. Which are the tools that support that? So we've asked each of the tool during the FOSDEM workshop to provide a one-pager describing their tools, their plans. So we'll bootstrap that with that and probably reuse some of the OpenChain landscape. But the point is putting more of this information, trying to reduce the confusion we all have there may be useful. There's the key question here: should we list proprietary tools? I'm not there to promote proprietary tools, though I think there could be one thing of interest, which is to state which tool or feature of a tool competes with an equivalent proprietary tool. Just that gives a bit more insight on what the capabilities are. We discussed, and there was a question earlier on about tools, benchmarks, and test suites, which is also another area. So Bosch has started an effort there in the open to provide a suite of test data and benchmarks. We still need to clarify a bit what we would want. What should be in this test? Should it be SBOM? Should this be about detection accuracy? And so on. Who runs them? And all that always, it's great to have the willingness to do things that cross all the tools. It's difficult to actually do the work because, each time it requires time. There's other collaboration opportunities. We didn't debrief on the whole thing, but there's a lot of opportunities between projects to do integrations and integrate this tool with this tool. That came out and will come out on that. And next step, we had agreed to have a follow-up meeting online in late April, and I'll reach out to the workshop participants to have a one-time meeting there. We're trying to avoid adding more to the meeting roster, so just one time to follow up on the things we discussed, and especially collaboration opportunities and call to actions. That's it. I'm sorry to have been a bit over time, but again, next year, please join FOSDEM, join this event, join the Fringe event, so prepare a day or two before FOSDEM, and I look forward to see you online.
Brilliant, Philippe. Thank you so much for recording this for us, and especially for being so flexible in taking some detours and answering questions. This recap is a really good part of our year, I think, and I hope a lot of people will be able to catch up with this recording, and hopefully some of them will make it to FOSDEM next year, including myself. So thank you again. And everyone,
go ahead.
I was going to say, everyone on the line, thank you very much. I see people are sending you lots of thanks in the chat, Philippe. You are popular.
Great. Well, don't hesitate to reach out. I'm going to put my email. I'm easy to find online, but I'm putting my email there. Again, I think if we can find ways to fund this shared knowledge base, and find a way to do it in an enlightened way where it benefits both companies that fund this effort and the commons at large, that would be awesome.
A very good message to end on. Thank you, Philippe. Everyone, be well, be healthy, and be back for the next webinar. Check our schedule on openchainproject.org/. participate, to see the whole raft of things that we've got in the next 2 months. And that's it. Take care all. Thank you again, Philip.